All right, welcome everyone. Again, this is the Triple Zero Freight for Cities webinar. This is our day 2 session on zero emission freight. Welcome, thank you for joining us. We will begin now.
Thank you, Travis. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I think our audience is from Europe, from US, and from China. So my name is Daizhong Liu. I'm a China Director of WRI Road Center. Welcome to join WRI Triple Zero Freight for Cities webinar series. This webinar series is organized by the WRI Road Center. The center is the World Resource Institute's programs that's dedicated to shaping a future where cities work better for everyone. And the center was established in 2014. Today, we have more than 300 staffs around the world, and 80% of our staff are based in our local office in Africa, Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, and Turkey. WRI Road Center for Sustainable Cities have pioneered an ambition triple zero vision for urban transportation that is striving for zero emission, zero road deaths, and zero exclusion from the healthy education, food, and economic services that make cities livable, equitable, and just for everyone. So urban freight is essential, often overlocated piece to achieving this vision. So it's very important to contribute to our vision. So WRI invite you to join our multiple days, 4 parts, the webinar series. This panel discussion will explore topics relating to like day 1, designing and implementation an urban freight policy roadmap and building effective partnership. And today is day 2 sessions. We are more focused on the zero emission freight. And the day 3, we are talking about the Vision Zero planning and the role of a freight. And the last day, we are talking about the street and the curbside management and the complete street and improve the last mile. So these are 4 parts combined together as our webinar series. So today is a zero emission freight. This open panel discussion explores how companies are moving toward zero emissions, urban freight fleets, and what cities can do to help actively to support the EV transitions. So this is today's topic. Firstly, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Liu Ying. Liu Ying is the Director of Energy Saving and Emission Reduction Center at the Beijing Transportation Institute. This institute is a governmental think tank of the Beijing Transportation Commission. She has played a leading role in mitigating transportation-related air pollution and the GHG emission in Beijing. And Liu Ying has been deeply engaged in developing Beijing's 5-year strategic plans. This kind of plan is very important for China for each 5 years. And in particularly for vehicle electrification, sustainable freight policies. So let's welcome her to give a keynote speech to us. Charles, Liu Ying, can you open your video and do you need the PowerPoint? Can you hear me? Oh. Sorry, I think they have some technical problems for Liu Ying, huh? So let's wait a moment. I saw her online. I saw she online, huh? Can you hear me?
可以了。
Okay, okay. Okay, great. So Travis, can you share the screen for Liu Ying?
The slides will be up in a moment.
Okay. Hello, Liu Ying, can you hear me? Can you open your video and audio? Let us see you.
就该我讲了是吗？
对 ，Yeah,
哦，
it's
好
your
的，
turn.
稍等啊，
Okay.
突然音频突然断线。可以看到吧？
Yes, we can.
各位不好意思啊，刚才我电脑出了点小问题。非常荣幸参加这次活动，我来给大家介绍一下，北京在这个零排放货运方面的一些经验吧。这在某一方面也代表了中国特大城市在货运方面的一些尝试，跟大家分享。首先呢，我介绍一下背景，实际上是在2013年以后。大家从这条线上图上可以看到，在这个整个中国吧，整个的这个污染防治呢，就空气质量呢，进入到了第3个阶段，就是说呢，是以机动车为代表的移动源的这个排放呢，成为一个首要的污染源。其实大家也都知道，那个前后发生了非常严重的 PM2.5的这个污染问题。在这里面呢，这个整个货物运输呢，就是在污染的这个机动车污染中呢，占比是非常大的。这边呢，我分享一下，北京的数据，它呢是在这个整个货车的保有量呢，在北京市的保有量呢，大概只有6%，但是它的 PM2.5和氮氧化物的排放呢，就达到了51%和63%。所以说呢，它呢是整个的这个污染的一个非常严重的一个污染源。所以呢，这个关于货物运输，特别是道路货物运输的绿色发展问题呢，就备受关注。在这个主要的这个思路呢，其实从2012年开始，这个中国特大城市，特别像北京呢，一直也在摸索，这个主要的治理方法。我把它总结为呢，这个2大方面。一个方面呢，是从2017年、18年开始启动的这个这个货物运输的运输结构调整。这个呢，实际上在于把这个公路运输呢，尽可能转移到轨道和这个水运这个方面，用这个铁路和水运呢来承担更多的道路运输，这个是大结构方面的调整。另外呢，在道路的这个绿色发展的本身呢，也分2个政策体系，一个呢是行业的激励，比如说北京市也出台了绿色货运的激励政策。另外呢，一方面呢就车辆的这个优化，这里边呢也又分2块。一个呢是加快的这个老旧这个车的这个淘汰，有一系列的政策体系。另外呢，就是促进新能源货车的发展就是说用更加清洁的车辆呢代替这个高排放的车辆。所以呢，这个呢就是这张图呢就是整个的关于这个货物运输的零排放的这个整个的思路。我一个个介绍一下。首先呢，运输结构调整。运输结构调整呢，是一个中国的一个整体的一个国家层面的一个战略部署。是从2018年4月呢就开始进行这个相应的这个运输结构的调整工作。在这里边呢，应该北京市呢当时的背景呢，整个的这个到发的这个物资呢是1年呢是2.5亿吨，其中呢81%呢是依靠这个公路运输，铁路呢占比是比较低的，只有6.4%。当然我也知道呢，其实在全世界范围内，这种对于特大城市来说，铁路的这个占比都是相对来说是比较低的。但是呢，中国呢，由于考虑到整体的能源和环境问题，也是想这个更多的来使用我们的轨道，包括我们的地铁、城铁和这个大铁国铁，来更多的承担我们的这个城市的说，可不可以更多的承担我们的城市的这个货运输？这里边呢，其中呢明确了这个相应的这个枢纽节点，以及呢相应的这个物资的种类，包括矿件、商品车、生活必需品、钢铁和这个生活性煤炭来进行呢这个尝试性的推广。特别是矿件材料我们刚才提到了将近这个2.5亿吨的物资里面呢，北京市有1亿吨是主要运这个矿件，就是我们来建楼房桥梁道路这种矿件材料。而这种矿件材料其实是非常适合 在一定距离范围以上呢是适合铁路运输的。所以这个呢是整个我们北京呢选择了这五项的这个物资呢来进行转移到铁路上来进行运输。在这样呢，2019年呢有300万吨的货物呢从公路转移到了铁路。整个我们刚才提到了这个铁路的到发比之前是6.4%，上升了8.1%，它的交通的环境效益呢也逐步显现。必须说明的呢是呢，这个从2018年这个运输结构调整呢，调整的工作从2018年呢全国范围内实现的试行，未来的5年呢还会更加大力度的向铁路和航运向这个水运来转移，进一步呢从根本上呢保障我们的这个整个的货物运输里边的这个从大的结构上来实现呢节能减排。然后呢，我们看一下这个进入到这个道路的这个绿色这个本身，就是我们在更多的物资转移到铁路以后，那我们剩下的必须还是需要用用公路来运输的这部分呢，主要采取的就我刚才介绍的，首先呢，我们是北京市呢发布了一个，就是也是学习了我们欧洲、美国的先进经验。出台了这个绿色的货物运输的这个发展的实施方案，对这种高效的货运企业呢，我们这个进行这个奖励，一共呢设置了这个多项的这种指标和加分项里边包括像我们新能源车的比例，我们这个其中这个低排放车辆的比例，以及这个企业的运输效率等等，一共呢这个相关的这个促进了相关企业呢更新新能源和这个车辆呢是2.3万辆。另外呢，就是加快这种我们的老旧的这个淘汰的这个车辆，这里边呢其实用了2部分，一个呢就是我们有一定的这个北京市呢出台了这个资金的支持政策，单车呢最高的可以补贴10万元来进行这个刺激和激励。另外呢，就是我们实行了限制性政策，实际上北京是实行了比较严格的这个低排放区的这个政策，就是说我们在全市域范围内是不允许国3排放货车通行的只允许国4及以上的车辆通行。这个呢是从就全天呢全市范围内，北京市范围是非常大的，有1.6万平方公里，在这么大的一个范围内呢是不允许国3货车来使用的。另外呢，我们对城市5环内对办理因为北京市实行的是白天必须持证才能上路，其中呢我们这部分车辆呢90%是新能源汽车，就是在这个发放通行证的时候呢，专门大家可以看到这边有个电的这个字，就这张证呢就是专门发给新能源汽车的。目前呢，这个新能源汽车当时在实行这个政策之前呢，北京市这个持证的这个车辆呢，新能源货车只有4%，现在呢已经到了71%，就是说我发100张通行证里面呢，有70张呢是发给新能源的。然后第4季度呢，我们在2020年底将达到90%，因为呢剩下呢还需要有一部分的汽柴油货车呢去提供它一些比如说危险品冷链的这个运输，所以这部分呢就整个第4季度这个整个的比重呢我们在90%，还有10%呢用来做一些基础的保障。另外呢，就是介绍一下这个新能源的使用情况。新能源使用情况呢，我们是分几种情况。第一呢，是在一些像比如说矿电材料，我们这个北京市呢推广了这个就是这个在这个载乘这个续航里程在170公里的这个重型卡车这个正在实验，它是一个换电模式。大家可以看到，这张图呢，就是重型卡车的这个换电站。然后呢，它是充换一体的新能源重型货车。另外呢，也会把一些一些像那个搅拌车呀等等，也在推行这个纯电的这个模式这个呢，这样呢，实现我们矿电材料的运输呢，从铁路运下来以后，直接就用这种这个重型的这种这个纯电的这个卡车呢进行短接，这样的话呢，整个的矿电材料的运输呢就是一个相对来说是一个从污染物的角度当然碳排放还是有的，从污染物的角度是一个就零排的这么一个过程。 这个整个的运输链条呢，在北京呢已经在实施了，下一步呢还会进一步的推广。另外呢，就是氢燃料啊，因为大家也知道，就是重型的这个换电模式呢，它的限制还是说这个里程比较短啊，基本上就是在单程80公里以内，所以它适用的应用场景还是比较有限。那结合呢冬奥会这个2022年冬奥会的这个举办呢，我们北京呢也在研发并且推广呢氢燃料的这个货车。目前呢已经有300多辆呢正在投入使用，下一步呢也是希望整个的这个，当然这个是不仅是那个什么，不仅是货车了，也包括一些公交、旅游等等呢，能够达到一个3000辆以上的一个规模。这个是这个整个我们在车型的这个能源结构上面的一个考虑。以上呢就是北京的这个主要的在货运方面的做的一些这个零排放方面做的一些工作。整体来看呢，未来的展望呢，提出3点。一个呢，我们也深刻的感觉到啊，就是说货物运输是在整个的经济运行的一个非常重要的一个环节，它呢产生了大量的这个污染排放问题，包括交通拥堵和安全问题。但是呢，由于在这个环节，可能各国情不一样啊，在中国来说呢，它实际上是一个末端环节，它的解决方案呢，实际上可调节的这个空间非常有限，因为呢，这个利润空间不在这个环节，所以呢，它的这个企业都是保本微利的，所以在这个里面还需要呢，从经济从产业以及用地方面呢，更好的去设计整个这套的整个供应链体系。这样的话呢，在这个源头，比如说货主企业，他就要求呢，就由货主企业呢来要求促进这个绿色的这个运输，这样呢对整个货物运输，包括它的物流通道的设置等，它是个系统的工程。所以这个呢是下一步我们中国特大城市从源头上解决货物运输污染问题的一个整体考虑。当然这里边的这个运输结构调整也属于这一部分的。另外呢，我们也是会结合新能源车的这个推广应用呢，进一步的去完善货物的这个货运企业的组织模式。其实从北京的推广经验来看，新能源下的这个新能源车辆这个交通工具的更新以后，整个的货物运输的一些组织模式发生了变化，因为它中间涉及到了需要充换电需要适应它的车型以及相应的人才，所以这方面呢是整个就完善围绕着新能源车会整个的改善呢。会整个的改变这个货物运输的一些组织模式这个呢也是我们和先进企业，比如像京东、像顺丰这些中国的这个货物运输的头部企业正在共同努力的一个方向。另外呢，也是在这个管理政策方面，除了继续实行可能更高标准的这个低排放区政策，比如下一步可能考虑到国4的车辆，我们还会进一步的出台呢一些领跑型的和这种激励型的政策，为整个的这个货物运输呢，这个零排放呢打造一个政策环境。目前这些政策呢也正在研究过程中，预计呢在2021年呢会实行新的一批政策。另外呢就是说是结合着整个的物资流通呢，也在建立呢这个，因为现在已经进入到一个数字化的一个时代，所以呢会建立一个大多元的这个数据体系来进行呢整个的监测呀、这个分析趋势预测呀等等，这样呢为整个的这个零排放的这个物流体系的这种可持续运行提供一个更好的一个支撑环境主要就是这些，谢谢。
Okay, thank you very much, Liu Ying. You really give out a lot of brands, the ideas. We can discussion it later in our panel discussion. So before we go to the next session, let me introduce our panelists. First, let's introduce the Giacomo Lozzi. He coordinates the Urban Free, the working group at the Polis. The Polis is a European network of cities and the regions working on transportation innovation. He is in charge of the capacity building, transferability, and the dissemination activities in several EU research projects on transport and logistics. Giacomo, welcome you. The next panelist is Sophie Panti. She is the Executive Director of the Smart Fleet Center and the Chair of Sustainable Supply Chains of ALICE. She brings the global logistic community together to support companies in their journey to zero-emission freight and logistics. Hi, Sophie. The next panelist is Zuri Zheng. He is the head of the Sustainable Mobility at ICLEI. ICLEI's Sustainable Mobility supports cities and the regions in creating sustainable mobility for people and freight. Hello? Zuri, can you hear me? Okay. The next panelist is Boris Court-Peck from the FedEx. He is the chief engineer of a global vehicle for FedEx Express, where he is facilitating the goal of increase the FedEx Express vehicle fuel efficiency 50% from 2005 baseline by 2025. As a chief engineer, he also provides the technical vision and the strategic counsel to direct practical leading edge implementation for fleet innovation and efficiencies. Hi, Boris. Okay, so they are our the panelists. Before we go to the Q&A sessions, we prepare 3 Menti questions. Travis, can you show the website to our audience and the panelists? I hope both of you know how to use our website to join our Q&A, the Menti question. Travis? So we have 5 minutes to answer this question, and this question can also a part of our panel discussion.
Sorry, just one moment. I'm sharing my screen.
Okay, no problem. So, okay. Okay. Please join this Menti question. Use your phone or your computer. Go to that website and input the code 50B6C to answer these questions. I saw a lot of people already start. So the first question is about what policy intervention in your city using to decarbonization fleet. Okay, we saw a lot of answers here. So you only can pick up a maximum 2 options. Whoa, it's a very dramatic change. So most of people thinking something else. Oh no, the first one, huh? The subsidy is more important. Let's go to the 30 answers, then we go to next question. Now it's the 28. Okay. So the next question is what are important, the near-term solutions for decarbonization freight? So the same, you can pick up 2 options. Most of people select the battery EV, huh? Even not a hydrogen fuel EV, huh? Interesting. So let's go to the next question. So later we can come back to this question's answers. So which vehicle class represents the quickest win in terms of fleet decarbonization? So this is the last question. Interesting. Okay. So Travis, can we go back to the first question's answer? And we can go over the first question's discussion, first round discussion. Okay, this one. Great. So I have a question for Giacomo. In partnership with the Transportation Decarbonization Alliance and the C40, I know you prepare a very good report and the guidance for cities to incentive the procurement of EVs, including implementation zero emission zones. Can you introduce us some of the important findings from this work? And what are some of the zero emission incentives you are finding are most successful or promising? Giacomo, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Shows the subsidy and the low emission zone is very important. Is that right?
Yeah. So thanks for inviting me and for giving also so much relevance to the topic of freight. We know that it's very relevant, and you are even giving 4 appointments on this. So we're very pleased of that. I would just like to briefly introduce Polis. So thanks for your first introduction, but just to say that it's a network of local authorities, so cities and regions from Europe working on transport innovation. We gather more than 80 members from all over Europe, and we work on 3 main areas. We work on European policy, so we represent the voice of cities and regions when it comes to European legislation on transport. We work on research, so we involve cities and in research projects where they can test innovative solutions. And we also organize working groups and peer-to-peer exchange activities between cities, but also between them and the industry sector, especially in the case of freight. So the ultimate goal of Polis is to help cities improve livability and the accessibility of public space by reducing pollution and congestion. But when you do this, of course, you have to ensure that the economy of the city works and the citizens have access to goods and services that they need. And this was even more clear when with the COVID pandemic, when logistics and deliveries became quite essential service. I mean, they were before already, but it became clear to everyone. So also the increase of e-commerce due to COVID, but also pre-existing urbanization trend brought the need to mitigate the possible negative impacts of this augmented freight movements of different types. That's why also Polis has a dedicated working group on urban freight, which is growing, has a growing interest among cities. Before it was a bit neglected topic. And within this working group, as I said, we identify common actions and share solutions. And one of these is also being the target of zero emission freight, which is also in line with the European priorities defined in the white paper and in the Green Deal. So we discuss also these solutions with the industry sector, in particular ALICE, of which Sophie is also a member, which is the European platform for logistics, so that we can identify priorities together and therefore speed up the transition. And based on these dialogues and the research projects we are involved in, we have also started preparing this document that you mentioned, and it's still under preparation, but where we identify also some incentives for this transition. And I think the correct answer to your pool is not something else, but everything, in the sense that the right solution is a combination of different types of incentives that can be more money related, like tax benefits for the investment in electric vehicle or charging infrastructure, but also vehicle purchase subsidies. This was very clearly presented in the keynote speech. Also leasing and new financing mechanism, but also since the total cost of ownership is overall convenient, yeah, we need all these measures to support especially small players to adapt. But also we need some softer incentives like fleet recognition schemes or labeling schemes for recognizing that companies are belonging to such a scheme. And also other positive incentives like preferential access permission to limited traffic zones or areas and bus lanes that can give a comparative advantage to players that behave correctly and in line with policy requirements. And but indeed, incentives is shouldn't be only about one-to-one vehicles replacement, but also to avoid trips and making the delivery system overall more efficient. But we will talk about this later.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Giacomo, I think you mentioned a very important thing. That's the right solution should be the combination with a lot of solutions. And there have no single solution can be the best. So I have a similar question to our next panelist, Duri. So when you implementation such kind of zero emission free in the city, what kind of barrier of the policy you think is the most challenging? And do you have any tools can use for the city to moving forward?
Thank you, Daizong, and also thank you for WI for these wonderful experiences and opportunity to be able to speaking and also to see some of the colleagues here, because some of the colleagues on this panel I haven't been able to see in person for the past few months, even though we have been working on the same projects. Also wonderful to see many of the familiar names or faces on the attendee lists, which I hope wouldn't trigger too many very sharp questions later. So as you know, ICLEI, we mostly work with cities in emerging markets or emerging economies, most of all. The context actually varies, but I do agree on Giacomo's sort of presentation and comments early on as to there is no single bullet that actually reflects very well on the problems we have been encountering at ICLEI while we're working with the regional governments and cities. The barriers and challenges actually come from, if I may say, just use very simple 3 bullet points. They are data, which means because the stakeholders in the field are still very fragmented and it's hard to have an overview of the urban logistics or urban freight, which is the area that ICLEI has been working on. So for cities, it's really hard to understand the freight transport, freight movements in their jurisdictions. And secondly, it's the barriers in terms of the regulation and mandate, which goes hand in hand with the first bullet point, because it's a very fragmented industry and sector that cities, while they don't have the overview of the sector and the industry, it's hard for them to come up with that one single umbrella overarching regulation and policy to regulate, to manage the urban freight sector. And many times that cities don't really have the mandate to put their foot down, to really crack down the say freight traffic or illegal or informal transport sector. Sometimes it's actually the state government or the sort of the provincial government actually have the mandate to regulate the freight sector, and sometimes it's even in the hand of the national government. And there's an incoherence between the level of different governance. I think last but not least is the stakeholder engagement when at ICLEI, every time we reach out to partners. Talking about logistics, someone just rang my bell, and definitely from DHL that came right in time for this session. Sorry about the interruption, perfect timing. Last but not least, stakeholder engagement. Whenever as eClay, we went out to this field to work with cities, and we realized that nobody actually in that particular city, from the public, from the business sector, from the government and sector, has the overview of actually who uses the freight. I mean, we all use the freight, like my tea, my coffee, we all use the freight service, but like actually who survive on the freight industry and who work on the freight industry and who should put their skin in the game. I think that is a very crucial question. And for tools, we don't have the silver bullet. However, we are thinking that one is the for cities to understand their GHG or carbon emissions, which is what from eClay we have been developing with partners such as Smart Freight Center, to understand how the best for cities to report their own GHG emission through the data. They have limited resources, they have physical resources or data-wise. And secondly, I think peer-to-peer exchange is very important, like Giacomo has mentioned. So for eClay, we just recently set up this eco-logistics community, and to encourage the peer-to-peer exchange, using the pool of the experts and experienced cities to sort of to stimulate the conversations between cities, because some cities might find common grounds between each other. It's easier for them to scale up, to transfer their skills in one way or another. So these are the two sort of tools from eClay we have been working together with cities.
Okay, thank you. So we are really expect to see the truth can be applied in China or some other cities around the world. And my next question is to Sophie. Sophie, I think you are very famous expert in the public and the private collaborations to moving the zero emission freight. So my question to you is, what are important action areas you're thinking that the city and the companies can work together? And could you provide some example or cases that's very successful to moving forward? Thank you. Please unmute.
Yes, I just unmuted. Can I share my screen to show a slide? Yes,
sure.
Because I'd like to show a slide.
Travis?
I think I can do this.
Okay.
Hope you can see this one. Yeah, can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see.
Yeah, okay. So thanks first of all for inviting me to be part of this webinar as well. And I wouldn't say necessarily an expert, it's more like we're network moderators, coordinators, trying to bring the private and public sector close together on this important topic. What is really key is to understand private sector companies deliver freight in cities. Obviously, you have also some public services like garbage collection, but by and large, it is private sector players, whether it's DHL or Amazon or others or big companies who hire carriers to pick up and deliver freight. And at the same time, the government is there to set the policy and to the infrastructure. So in order to decarbonize freight, there are 5 solution types. First, on the left, is that you reduce the freight demand. So what you're trying to do is making sure that there's less demand for freight, for example, by getting people to pick up the goods they buy in the store rather than you having to drop it off, or for example, by co-loading, right? The second one is about transport modes that are smartly used to combine. So could freight be delivered in Amsterdam? We have DHL boats on the canals. There's also cargo bikes that can deliver it. This morning I've been taking photos of food couriers who are taking the parcels at the last mile or last 100 meters rather than trucks, and that doesn't clog the small streets here. So that's the second one. The third one is about fleets and assets, sharing them to the maximum possible. Here is where I can imagine where if different suppliers, whether different companies, for example, all deliver goods to customers in cities, where they start to combine their freights in a single van, so that you have less vans traveling to the city, but also packaging. So for example, if you order a t-shirt, why not have it rolled up instead of having a flat big box? And that way you need less space, and so more goods can fit in one vehicle, or you can use smaller vehicles to deliver. Fleets can be more energy efficient. So We know better tires can save a lot of energy, especially in urban environments. Driving behavior is super crucial and can save up to 25% of the energy used if you have good drivers compared to bad drivers. In Tokyo, for example, we see that the trucks in cities are really made very tall and skinny, so they can maneuver through small streets, and by doing so, making them tall and skinny, they can actually carry more cargo than lower vehicles. And finally, it's alternative fuels, and as you saw in the poll also, from an urban freight perspective, electric is the way to go. Long distance, different story, but urban freight is electric, future is electric. Now, where the two need to work together is that if a company is going to say, I'm going to work on my urban freight by going electric, for example, you need cities to have infrastructure to charge. You ideally would like cities to give preference, for example, giving permits, restricted permits to get into the city to electric vehicles over others. There's also a big need for curbside management, because right now many of the cities don't provide a real good planning for freight, so trucks are parked all over the place. So that's just an example, some examples of where the two might work together. And the final one is that governments, so city governments, should lead by example. They should themselves decide to only buy freight that is low carbon. If they don't set that example in that direction, then you know, you don't send the right message. And you saw in the poll as well, purchasing was very high, and so I think that cities are already moving that direction. I'll leave it at this. Actually, one point I want to add, because of what was said before, calculating emissions. Data sharing is absolutely critical for city policy to work and for companies to reduce their own emissions. And what we right now see is too little collaboration between the two on data sharing. And as a result, cities are not able to even know what the emission footprint is, let alone respond to it. So I don't underestimate the need for sharing data. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. You are sharing the comprehensive measures. In summary, I think it is in freight sectors version of avoid, shift, and improve. Is that right? So
that's correct.
I have a question. What are the barriers with the data sharing, for example, between the company and the cities?
Well, the barriers is at the moment that there's no common methodology. So we have the greenhouse gas protocol exists that is quite broad. It applies for all companies to use for their own emissions footprint. There's also a greenhouse gas protocol for cities, but when you go into detail of that, the amount of information and guidance on calculating transportation or freight is very limited. And so Smart Freight Center has been working on one methodology to calculate emissions from freight transportation for companies called the GLAC framework, and it covers all modes, ships, air, everything. And what really would be needed, and this is of course why we also partnered with eClay, is to start working towards how can we have a common language between companies and policymakers on how they should calculate the data, so the methodology. So that's one part. The second is then having access to data. Unfortunately, many cities have realized too late how much leverage they could have if they grant access to companies to operate in the cities. My belief is, if you're the boss of the city, you have the right for data of anyone operating in the city. And I think that if governments would be more linking the access to basic data about trips covered, the type of fuel, the type of vehicle, etc., as part of the permits to give companies access to the city, they would overcome a huge barrier in data access, because the tool that Shu explained that eClay developed with our input, it heavily relies on data access, and that's exactly the barrier. They don't have that data access. So contracts is one. And thirdly, I think collaborations. I think if cities start developing their urban freight plans, just like companies are developing their own sustainable logistics roadmaps, bring companies on board as an early stage, see them as partners rather than a problem they create in cities with freight. Many of these companies are very, very willing to collaborate and think together with cities, not only on what measures need to be taken and what policies they need to support them, but also how could a constructive way of data sharing and collection be set up that meets the need of government, but also it works in practice for business, because that's how businesses think. It needs to work in practice. So I think the partnership, the collaboration with cities and businesses, not only on solutions, but also on data, there's room for improvement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we talked a lot about the Menti question 1. Now let's go to the Menti question 2. Travis, can you show the result of our question 2? Okay. Okay. So, okay. So I have a question to Boris. Can you hear me? So I will very want to know what's your choice. And when people think about the decarbonization freight, obviously the answer will be the e-tracks, but we talk it later. And now I want to know, your perspective on other solutions. So for example, do you think the delivery consolidation of cargo bikes or even drones will be the that you excited solutions for zero emission cargo? Or what other solutions are the most excited and promised for your works? Boris.
Hello. Basically, the message FedEx has is that we're fuel agnostic. We're not picking a single solution because we are operating in 220 countries around the world. So that means that we've already got electric vans, for example, in Beijing since 2018 because of that mandate and because of the efficiencies. We started using Roxo, the delivery robot, in August of last year. We made our first deliveries with Wing, an electronic drone, in November last year, October. And we're working to roll out 1,000 electric vehicles in California and putting the infrastructure in place. And a general perspective that we've had for our thousands of delivery vehicles worldwide is what we call reduce, revolutionize, reduce, replace, revolutionize, which is the concept that you utilize what you have more efficiently. You reduce the waste within it, consolidate the freight, make sure that your routes are more efficient. As was mentioned earlier, your driver behaviors are more efficient, and then you replace those old assets, the ones that are less efficient or not as well utilized, with smaller, more fuel efficient vans. For example, we're also working with cargo bikes. We've had some going out in the Netherlands in January of this year. We've also got those in the UK, London, Frankfurt, Germany, Milan, and Paris and Madrid. So we're not locked into a particular method. And then that revolutionized part is again, not sticking to only the vans that come up and deliver packages. We want to have options and modules. One of the things, it's somewhat tying into, I think, one of the Menti questions, but the longer term, things like robots and drones don't have the existing infrastructure that our roads and sidewalks do already. So leveraging what we've got more efficiently, so the roads, the rail, sidewalks, bike lanes, is a much easier, more efficient place to start than, oh, we have to put in new routes and plans for robot vehicles or drones. So that's a a way of easing into more improved efficiencies.
Okay, thank you, Boris.
Yeah.
Giacomo, I have the same questions. So tapping into the opportunity of a vehicle electrification, how low the consolidation and the efficiency improving measures come into play from your perspective?
Yeah, I think just to also start from what we were saying before, the power of procurement, it's very important, not only for the vehicles, so public procurement, cities can buy clean vehicles, but can also buy services and goods that are delivered in a clean way. And also they can use this demand to aggregate the supply of these goods. So they can also use consolidation or micro hubs to consolidate the goods that they need to be delivered to their venues, and this is a strong tool in the hands of cities. And indeed, we are also neutral in that sense. Like we see electric vehicles as a mean to support the zero emission, but it's not only that, it's also cargo bikes that are also easy to couple with micro hubs, and especially with the rise of e-commerce and smaller parcels, this can be a good way. There are studies that say that cargo bikes can cover up to 25% of parcel deliveries, but also 50% of services trips, and even 70% of shopping trips, so also normal bikes, and that's also part of logistics. So it's all types of vehicles. Regarding drones, for example, we are involved in some research about it, but we see the deployment of drones for delivery is a bit limited, also because you don't want to move road congestion to air congestion. You have to be careful with that. And then, but also to stress what Sophie just said, it's very important that there's a strong collaboration also when you set up this kind of new systems like micro hubs, that there's support by the local authority that understands the needs of the service providers and facilitates the deployment of these solutions. And it cannot be a top-down approach, but it has to be a collaborative implementation. And it's very important that there's this kind of mediation that can be supported also by research. And the fact that sharing data is essential, it is true, but also I see with local authorities, you have to select the data that local authorities need, because they don't need all types of data. It would be too much, and they have to understand them and to use them for evidence-based measures, and also to monitor the measures. And so, and as Sophie said, it has to be feasible for the industry. So you should agree with them from the very beginning on when you place a new regulation, what they can share, what they are willing to share, and then support and incentivize this sharing principles by giving something in return that can be access to some specific services or lanes or whatever. But this has, and what we are trying to do with the industry sector, both cities, what are they trying to do at their local level, and we as an organization with industry organizations, is to define the basic data that should be shared, and for which reason.
Okay, thank you, Giacomo. My next question is for Ying. Can you hear me, Ying?
我在。
Okay, great. So my question is, as I know, the freight market is a very fragmentation. So that means that they have a lot of small size carriers in this market, small companies. So they will have a big problems from the financial resource or capacity, technical capacity for vehicle electrification. So as a public agency, what advice from you have for public agency or private company that's seeking to address these problems? They can help the small company can build up their EV capacities. Yeah, please.
我想结合北京的实践回答一下这个问题。刚才其实也有一些观众在向我提问，我感觉首先是在整体的这个体系内，我就还是一向持这个观点。北京市实际上尝试着在重新架构物流体系，不仅是货物运输体系，来解决最终的运输环节的低碳问题。因为运输环节的低碳问题，由于成本太高，很难从运输环节由我们的货运企业去解决，这是我的一向的观点。所以呢，北京市更多的是从城市规划从用地以及我们的基础设施，还有产业结构，比如说要求我们的工厂必须修在铁路线旁边。就是像，或者是说，他在这个采购服务、运输服务的时候，必须要，其实就是说这部分的咱们运输环节的，这个费用呢，比如说我用这个新能源货车运输，可能涨了每吨呢20块钱，其实对货主企业，就对一些大型工厂，这个是可以消化的，但是对我们的这个小型的运输企业来说，我个人来说是很难解决。我们目前北京没有找到很好的解决方案。所以其实另外一方面也是说，其实我们在进行电气化的过程中，最大的阻力其实是来自于我们的小型企业，它没有这样的成本空间去消化这么大体量的，就在目前电气化还是处在一个成本非常高的环节，所以这时候现在的采取的模式更多的是，我个人觉得在电气化的过程中会发生企业的合并和一些小企业的退出。这个是没有办法的事情，所以对一些中小企业来说，他们会做出自己这个是一个自己的市场的选择。但另外一方面呢，也是政府会尽可能的提供一个公平的环境吧，就是说，为这个提供一些充电桩充电服务公用的这种配套这个是肯定的，是来这个进行这方面的，以及大家对这种市场的机会来进行把握。但目前来看，从北京来看，更多的还是要依靠头部企业主要是这些。
Okay, Ying, are you finished?
我结束了回完了。
Okay, we have some difficulties to hear the translation, but okay. So I think we have a lot of discussion on the Menti question 2, and now it's time to move to the next Menti questions. Travis, can you share your screen for the last question? Okay, so we are discussing how the technology adoption and the data issues that we can represent the quickest win in terms of the fleet, the decarbonization. We can solve the small household and the home delivery. It will be the top voted. So my next question is for Boris. I want to know what is the FedEx doing to reduce the CO2 emission in its global fleet? Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
And if we can put some slides up, I've got.
Okay, sure.
There we go.
There you.
Not worried about that. So some of the things that we're approaching, looking at overall efficiency and safety. There we go. This is what we've been focusing on to date with the intention of the 50% fuel efficiency improvement relative to our 2005 baseline since with a goal of achieving that by 2025. And it's a little bit what I was referring to in the last question of right sizing the fleet. So we've got a variety of different vans and trucks. As I was answering one of the mentee questions, we've got everything from motorcycles on up to the large semi-trucks with trailers and tens of thousands of vehicles worldwide. The majority are the vans that are walk-in type. And what we've been working on is recognizing historically there were very large square vans with big engines, and the majority of our packages are
Hello? I think we lost you. Boris? Okay. I think they have some technical issues, huh? So let's move forward. I have a question to, let's just continue waiting the Boris to come back. Is that okay? I have another question to Ray. Can you hear me? So we use this question to ask our audience what kind of vehicle classes that represent a quick win. But the question is, what are the major roadblocks for EV adoption, and why aren't EVs a larger percentage of the global fleet today? Can you answer this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Daizong. That's a very interesting question. I think the adoption of EV has been quite a sort of popular discussion for quite a while, and whereas in freight industry, I think it's particularly different from the passenger transport because you see the kind of heavy goods vehicles being electrified in Nordic countries or some part of the European Union because there's infrastructure has been ready. I think Boris mentioned this a while back, or I think, can't remember, it was Boris or Giacomo, sorry for my note. I mentioned about the infrastructure. So particularly for the uptake of EV, I think from ICLEI's experiences when we work with the emerging economies and cities in the emerging markets, they don't always have the grid ready for the uptake of EV. That could be one of the biggest roadblocks, and infrastructure and charging points, and even they don't really have the technical knowledges in this field. They don't have the procurement policy ready. And in freight in particular, well, in countries like Germany, for example, maybe 80% of the last mile or the urban logistics is done by Deutsche Post and DHL. And say in India, Colombia, or Argentina, the bigger companies or bigger players may only account for, say, 30–40% of the last mile logistics, which means the rest of the services, which is the 60%, 70%, is actually done by private, like small companies, as In mentioned quite rightly. It's actually done by the small companies and also by informal sectors and sometimes even illegal sectors or the white label vehicles and companies. And that's really hard to regulate. Not saying that they need to be regulated, but in this way that for cities to support their adoption and transition into a more sustainable way of delivering. And so I think that's infrastructure grid is definitely one of the biggest roadblocks, and the other is actually to understand the majority of the informal and the kind of white label operators.
Okay, thank you, Turi. I saw Boris come back. Can you hear me? So Boris, please let's finish your first present, then we go forward.
I apologize, that was embarrassing. I was running on battery and that was not a smart move. So let's get back to
It's okay.
be right size for the vehicles, and if that's where things dropped off, the efficiencies we've gained have been by optimizing the loading and vehicle size along with driver behavior. That's gotten us to over 40% fleet-wide efficiency improvements since that 2005 baseline that we're referencing. The last 10% or so is going to definitely require a significant amount of electrification. And the fundamental reason on that is that we can continue to increment at very small levels, small percentages, vehicle efficiency, new improvements in engine management, multi-speed, semi-automated drivetrains, hybrids, things of that nature. But fundamentally, the biggest shift is going to be using battery electrics. And the part of what's happened, and I hope you can see my cursor on that, is that the improved battery range, and these are miles on that lower axis, used to only limit annual mileage of an electric vehicle to 10,000 miles or so, 15 maybe. And that was of extreme limitation, plus you had upfront costs that were challenging. And in the past 10 years or so, the battery prices and power densities have improved to a point where that improved range and reduced cost has the ability to, in our case, it could, if there's a substantial enough manufacturing base, it could match 60 to 70% of our entire fleet volume. So that's quite exciting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Boris. I think it's really very exciting for FedEx to have so ambitious plan to do this. And my next question is for Ying. Can you hear me, Ying? We all, okay. We all know the BTI has done a lot of work formulating for calculating and reporting the logistics emission. I think you use the wrong channel, the translation. Yeah, but anyway, let's go on. So Ying, could you talk a little about this work and why good data is a key to supporting cities to decarbonization the emission from the freight?
好的，我跟大家也分享一下，在这个数据的这个方面的这个北京方面的我们这个交通发展医院的一个建设的一个情况。首先是这样的，其实大家也都清楚，因为像戴总您也很知道，就是整个货物运输跟客运相比，它的数据的体系化和这个来源是很差的。仅有这个。现在这个大家刚才提到了那个传感器采集来的一些车端的信息，实际上虽然它能够刻画整个结合我们的排放因子是能够刻画出碳排放的计算量的，但是其实远不足以解决这个问题。所以我们的数据的结构除了比如说我给大家举个例子，比如说就刚才咱们提到我们。比喻一个企业，它按照我们的工具算出来它的排放的量。能比较出两个谁高谁低两个企业，但你算完以后，你很难在决策我去采购的时候，因为它还有价格呀各方面，却能更采购那个低成本、低排放的这个企业。所以其实就是说，整个的我想表达的是，整个需要一个，我还是那句话，就是物流体系的重构。这个物流体系的重构里边包括了数据，它的这个货物从哪儿来，它为什么来？它是由哪个产业来的？来了以后，它为什么选择道路运输？选择道路运输以后，它是怎么运行的？那这个过程中，去刻画出来以后，再去看，就是说我最终末端的污染物的排放是在前端的哪个领域去产生的？是谁是对它的主要因素？ 所以这个是中国在我们就北京呢，就是作为特大城市在建立的一套体系，就是一个物资流通的体系。在这流通体系里边呢，进行刻画。所以我们的数据来源呢，一般是4大类，有30多种，包括用地，就我们的物流设施都在哪里，然后我们的通道都在哪儿，我们的源头的生产物资需求是多少，结合我们的工厂，然后我们的车队有多少。然后我们的车队里面的能源结构以及车队的运行情况和排放因子等等，这是一个非常比较庞大的基于大数据和我们的常规数据的一套体系。所以目前来看的话，北京在这个整个的物资的排放的情况，以及为什么产生这些排放，以及怎么解决排放方面，数据刻画的这个基础还是比较好，已经在实际中进行应用了。未来的这方面的减排的政策也会是基于这套数据体系来进行研究和推动，主要这些。
Okay, thank you, Ying. It's really very brilliant the advice from you as an agency of a government. And my last question is to Sophia. So we all know that emission from the heavy duty freight or medium duty freight is still the critical challenges for zero emissions. And my question is, what can we do let the car manufacturers, TNCs, and the public agency do together to accelerate that's a heavy duty or medium duty vehicles zero emission? Yeah. Please.
Yes. Thank you for this question. I realize that the focus is a little bit more on urban freight in this webinar, but to put it in context, of the global freight emissions, 62% is coming from road freight, according to the International Transport Forum. And of that 62%, 12% is then urban and 50% is non-urban. And that non-urban is by and large medium and heavy duty. So while there's a lot of promotion and encouragement on urban freight, and it's also important from an air pollution perspective, so I very much applaud it, we cannot wait for long distance freight. Yeah. And so the things that need to happen, in the long run, we need to move towards electrification. And whether that's going to be a combination of battery and hydrogen, or whether it's only going to be electric, I believe that at the moment, the verdict is still out there. There's tests done with hydrogen, there's tests done with electric. And because we have only 10 years left, really, to tackle this climate change battle, we cannot let it become a fight between hydrogen and electric. We need to really push, push, push. So I'm for electrification, but I want to make sure that we don't lose the other opportunities that might be a little bit earlier. For example, many of the multinationals we speak to are looking at how can they add biofuel to the mix. Everybody realizes it's not going to solve the full problem, but if you save 1 ton of CO2 in 2020, by the time it's 2030, you've saved 10 tons. In other words, every ton we save this year is going to multiply 10 times by the time 2030, which is why early action is so important. The other things that I think are really critical is training of fleet managers at trucking companies. And because those fleet managers are the ones who deal with the customers, they deal with the local authorities for the permits, they deal with the management, they deal with the drivers, they deal with the maintenance staff. They're the one at the center of the fleet, and giving them what we call a smart transport manager training can help them to understand what they can do about fuels, the vehicles, the drivers, the monitoring, and the ICT. Because don't underestimate the use of telematics, transport management systems, to give data to both the company to manage the fleet better, but also to the driver to drive better. So educating them is going to be really key. So that having said, in terms of measures that you can do inside the fleet, then we go outside the fleet. And what we need here is much more collaboration between shippers. And by shippers, I mean buyers of freight. If companies are less worried about the competition with others, but they move it pre-competitive. We compete on the shelf, not in the truck. If they adopt that mentality and saying, as long as my goods are transported from A to B, I'm okay for it to be pulled together with others. What it will do, it will make the trucking companies have greater flexibility to transport the goods, but also have the volume of freight that allows them to put it on trains, right? It is still a situation in many countries, I believe also in China, where steel or coal is still often transported by trucks, and we can't have that, right? And then I think those shippers or buyers have also a role to play in giving certainty for this sector. This is a commercial sector. If a carrier has a room of they make a profit margin of 2 or 3% at most. That's like working the whole year with all the risks included, and at Christmas you start making money. And then people are asking you to invest. You don't have the room for that. So customers, whether that being governments or whether it's being multinationals who give the contracts, should look at longer contracts. Because if you have a 1-year contract, you won't invest. But if you have a 3-year contract, then you're already going to take the risk to invest in certain things. And I think the whole procurement relationship between both shippers and carriers, but that governments can promote, is an area where we need to invest in much more. And finally, I want to make the link with Alice. I'm also on that European platform. They're very much in favor of a physical internet. And what that means is that you put the whole trucking in context of the bigger system. It's not about who owns the truck, who owns the fleet. It's about how do all the vehicles, the ships, the trains operate as one system. And it's like an internet. If you send an email from, say, Amsterdam to Beijing, do I care how it gets there? As long as it gets there, right? Let someone organize it. Is anybody organizing it? It is organized in a system and not by one particular provider. And I'm very much encouraging, and I think it's possible to do this, for example, at the level of US or Europe or China, where the government steps up much more trying to make this work as a system, whereby you still have individual companies, but whereby you give them incentives to collaborate and share their assets in favor of decarbonization of the entire system. Yeah? And final one is what I call offsetting. Money, we need money to invest in electric trucks and everything. Now, if you're a company and you still have residual emissions and you don't know how to get rid of them, what do? You invest in trees or solar panels. But how about this? What if a government would set up a scheme whereby they say, you don't need to invest in trees or solar panels, invest in our scheme, and we will use that money to pay trucking companies to replace their trucks with electric ones, or to use alternative fuels that might be a little bit more expensive. If that scheme were to be set up centrally and coordinated, a lot of companies would want to make use of it. One, because the certainty is bigger. You know if a truck has been replaced, whereas a complete tree is still standing in 10 years, you have to wait and see. But second, you're investing your offsets in your own sector, in the freight sector, where we lack money. So I think that's my fourth suggestion. So I think it's possible. We just need to collaborate on making it happen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sophie. You are always very brilliant, the solutions for us, for the answers. And at the same, I have a final question to Giacomo. So can you hear me? Okay. Yes. Okay. So unlike traditional the diesel vehicles, some quality features of e-freight is not visible. So besides, for example, like the batteries degradation. So besides the market analysis, what solutions are available to ensure the procurement is value for money? So that means how to incentive the car manufacturers to produce more e-freight. This is the question for you.
Yeah, and I think I can also address a question from the audience about what are the new policies in place for this, because I think and also continuing on what Sophie was saying, it's very important that there's money going for the development of these technologies, and we as Polis, but also Alice, we are part of a 2.0 partnership. That is the new partnership of the at European level that supports the research and implementation of this kind of solution. So it's European money that go to support this transition. And the novelty of this is that it takes place within a systemic perspective. Before, this kind of programs were really focusing only on the vehicles, and now it's becoming more important to integrate it into the system. So there's money going in that direction. You need research, you need implementation projects to test these applications, but you also need regulation, because and also a comment about Audi not going to invest on this soon, but if you implement regulation like now we're doing at European level with CO2 standards, for example, that companies have to fulfill in their production phase, that becomes compulsory. But also it's not only about vehicles, it's also about alternative fuel infrastructure. We have a regulation in Europe that now it's under revision that says that you have to place alternative charging infrastructure facilities, not only in cities, but throughout all the European corridors, so that also on the long trajectories, you can support this kind of transition. As Sophie said, it's not only a cities problem, you cannot invest in cities, but avoid to do it on other dimension. So this is also very important. We are also, together with Transport Decarbonization Alliance, we are unveiling the hidden demand for this kind of vehicles, because the truck manufacturers complain that there's not demand from the operators on that, but we are now putting together the demand of different companies, but also local authorities that would like to procure this kind of vehicles if they were on the market at acceptable conditions. But so all this is a combination of different factors, which is binding regulation, which is the offer of the market, which is the request of the and the demand of the operators, and also public authorities that have to be on the front line for this. So yeah, I think it's very important that we are also now part of an alliance that is specifically focusing on clean tracking. It's called the European Clean Tracking Alliance, that will be launched tomorrow, that puts together around 20 leading companies focusing on creating this demand, which is very, very important. So that's a yeah, a bit an overview of what we are doing at European level. I think then the most important part is that you lower the initial investment price for companies, because this is, as was said many times before, this is a very high barrier. And in the last year, we didn't manage to do that, to significantly reduce the buying price. Then the TCO is convenient, but then if you cannot invest on vehicles at the beginning, or use a charging infrastructure that should be also tailored on the sector, because you have different types of sectors that on logistics, especially urban logistics, that need totally different types of charging support. You can have the depot charging or opportunity charging, but you have to understand for whom and when. So that's also need of cities to understand the sector and to tailor policies based on what is needed.
Okay. Thank you, Giacomo. It's really a lot of very insight opinions from you. Okay, I think we are only have 3 minutes left. So the last question, let's answer some audience. I pick the question from audience. So anyone of you can answer. Huh? That's it's how freight sector is affected by the COVID-19. How do you think about it? And what emerging trade we observed that would define a zero-emission future? So anyone have ideas to answer this question? The COVID-19? Okay, Sophia.
Yeah, well, I think that there's a few trends that are happening. One is that more people work from home and stay at home, and that's going to shift the amount of transportation from personal transport to freight transport, and it makes the urgency to decarbonize freight even more important, in particular in cities. Second, I think a lot of companies that have as buyers or shippers, buy the freight, have tried to reduce the prices by all the time. And squeezing the last drop of blood out of the carriers, if you like. And they realize that in return, they have no transparency. So they're not resilient. So the shift will happen from moving from the just-in-time freight delivery to just-in-case, whereby companies are going to want to give up a little bit of flexibility and trying to give better contracts and give the suppliers more certainty in exchange for data, more transparency of the supply chain, so that those companies are better able to respond in crisis of Corona. Because even if Corona, the worst actually not over, depending on where you are, but there will be still hotspots popping up. Beijing in a second lockdown, that will happen in other places in the world. And if you're a company, you want to respond. And thirdly, I just think that we finally got the topic on the map. I mean, everybody's talking about freight, which 7 years ago when I started Smart Freight Center, I could only have dreamed of. So with that increase in awareness, I think that the whole freight sector and freight transportation is going to get more attention from companies because of the supply chains, from governments because they realize this is an area of growth. And so I mean, bright lights in dark ages is that we will get more attention for this topic. So.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much, Sophia. Your ideas about this one. So, okay, it's exactly time for ending. Thank you so much for all the panelists to join this webinar, and thank you our audience.